Hello and welcome to Reboot It, Rewind. This is the show where it's like an after show for Reboot It, where you go back and we talk about our biggest and most heated episodes, or maybe in this case, one of our just coolest, most fun episodes. And we give you all the chance to weigh in on your thoughts. Today we have the full crew. We got myself, Ron Swallow, Ed Greer, producer Bill,
I'll
and
say
Billy
hello.
Business.
I just want to do a cool head one, like.
Well, obviously the whole crew is here, and we are ready to talk to you about Back to the Future. I'm pretty excited about this one because we were all very nervous when we came into this episode in season 1, right?
Oh yeah.
We
Let's
shot
go
it.
Back to the Future.
Yeah, we shot it. We shot it in the warehouse that I used to work in, where I sold sandwiches. We made a set there so you guys could, get a feel of us being stuck in the basement with John Peters. And it was hot on that day, crazy hot.
Let's back up even further.
Yeah.
No, yeah. I think it's worth noting this was the first episode that we ever recorded, kind of in the version of the show that you guys know, because we ran the Wolverine episode as a dry run, audio only. We did the live episode at Comic-Con for Batman, which we'll talk about. But this was the first time that, yes, we picked our set, we lit it, we arranged the chairs, we arranged the mics, we got all the cameras up and running, and we did the show as the show. So, yeah, there was a lot. I would say there was some nerves just in terms of like, oh, is this gonna work? Definitely.
Well, we talked about like this list that we had made of stuff we want to do, and I think when you talk about like even just now, like go on Twitter and write like what's a movie that should never be remade, and I guarantee you at least 60% of the replies will be Back to the Future. And we knew that going in. And I was like, well, let's do that one. Like, what a perfect way to cement it. And again, this was coming off of Batman, which I was feeling a little nervous about because I was just like, do we have this? Do we know what we're doing? Because this is another really big swing if we can do Back to the Future. And I don't know if it worked in our favor or worked against us or either way, but not too long before we did this episode or before we recorded it, Bob Gale, who was the producer of Back to the Future, had done this interview, and he had literally said, no one's ever going to remake Back to the Future as long as I have something to say about it. So it was almost like challenge accepted, you know?
John Peters kicked in his door and was like, I'll show you, Gale.
Yeah. No, a giant mechanical spider leg came through, knocking stuff. But honestly, this also started another grand tradition, right? We have grand traditions in this show, and one of them got started with this, and it is ignore Ed Greer, because I was like, I don't ever want to do that. That sounds like the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life, and especially to make this our first kind of official episode. I felt like that was so dumb. It was like mind-boggling to me, but I tried to keep it bottled up. I don't know how well I did, but the bottom line is it established a thing of like, maybe when I'm the most resistant of something, we should really do it, and maybe when I'm like gung-ho, we should get the hell away from that, because it really kind of, I think this is one of the ones that showed the potential of the show, and I'm glad it was one of the first ones, but it really showed the potential of the show, that we didn't have to necessarily outduel the perfect screenplay. We had to make the real challenge, make something interesting out of it for now's audience. That's the challenge. It isn't outdueling history, trying to be better than history. No, it is creating a product out of that IP that you can present to people now.
I think it also helped that I don't think, while we're all fans of Back to the Future, I don't think any of us are like obsessed with Back to the Future.
Oh yeah.
There's
You know
just
what I
like,
mean?
you come in with like a comic book one or something of that nature where it's just like you've kind of already written stories in your head of how you would do it. But Back to the Future is kind of just like, it's pretty face value. It's like, this is what it is. You enjoy it and then you move on with your life. So it's like, I didn't come in like, well, Back to the Future 4, we have to do this. It was just like, it was a real challenge, and there was something like it was the challenge of like rebooting this property, but also like I don't want to undersell, like there just was there, as much as like we were sweating and trying to figure out how to do this, there was some sort of like pull up by your bootstrap kind of magic to that day of like, you know, the excitement was there. It was like, oh, we're not just talking about doing this anymore. Like we are here, we are hanging up lights, we are stringing together cameras and stuff. Like it was exciting. Like, and I think that excitement bled through for that first episode. I think we ran out of steam later in the day, but I think for that first episode, like we were, at least for me, I was on the high of like, man, how often do you talk about doing something and you just never do it? And here we are on a Saturday morning and it is blazing hot in the valley, but we're doing it. You know?
Yeah. And then later on, we walked over and got that chicken sandwich.
The
From
Popeyes chicken sandwich.
First time I ever had it.
Same.
was
And
not
Ed
that
would not
impressive.
shut up about how we didn't know how to order chicken correctly from Popeyes for the whole rest of the afternoon.
Based on the quality of that sandwich, he was right.
He was right, yeah. You
not
did
live up
warn
to
us.
expectations.
You did warn
Dude,
us.
I was trying to, and like I said, the sad part is, as a black person in America, sometimes you fall into certain tropes. And I was like your guide up the mountain. Like, look, I ain't carrying nothing for you, but I'm going that way. So this is how you don't have a boom slang bite you in the neck on your way up through the up to get this chicken. Okay. Now look, do not get the sandwiches quite overhyped. And if they make enough of them to serve everybody, they're stacked up like driftwood. You might as well go down to the beach and get something to eat. And this is kind of what I was doing for them. But I was like, well, what are you guys doing? If you're gonna do this, you gotta do it right.
So,
And you were
and we
correct.
didn't.
We
Yeah.
didn't.
And he was right. Look, I know Ed loves hearing this, but Ed was right.
Well, I don't necessarily. I'm not only right about chicken, so let's move on.
So let's talk a little bit about how we came up with the storyline, making the protagonist Biff's daughter, using Jules and Verne, etc.
Okay, can I say the one first thing? The first thing I
Sure.
think that we did that was interesting on this one was make it a boot roll. I think this is by definition the first time we've done this, and it is still, I think, the only time that we've done this where we.
Well, Wolverine,
it was-
I guess you could kind of call it a. Well,
because we
had
were trying to put it into
reboot
the MCU.
into something, but even so, yeah, this was the first time where we were not discarding the continuity that came before it. You're right.
Absolutely. Yep,
Yeah.
that was my point. Really.
Yeah, and I think that helped us as a starting point, perhaps. And I'm not saying we couldn't come up with a brand new one, because we could. But I
also
do
think-
like where we went.
Yeah, and I think from the point of the show, right, which is like, let's approach this as actual development executives and let's talk about this stuff in terms of like what is going to make the most marketable movie as well as the best movie. That really is the best decision because I think, Billy, you said it earlier, it might have been Ed, like this is such a simple face value story of Marty McFly gets stuck in the past, has to like bide his time and try not to screw up his parents' lives until Doc Brown can send him back to the future. Like, there's not that there's not a lot of there. I love that story. I love that movie. But in terms of like retelling that story, revisiting that story.
Well, it's like figuring out how to add something to the motorcycle that jumped over the Grand Canyon. Like, how much extra stuff can you add to that before it crashes into something? You know what I mean? And try to recreate that stunt. You know,
There's also not a ton of Back to the Future mythology to get lost in, which actually, when you think about it, honestly, the episodes where I feel like, and this isn't a guaranteed statement, but a lot of the episodes where we just zoom through it and we're like, wow, that was so easy and so good. Like this, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, where there's not a ton of mythology that we kind of get tied up in with ourselves. Like, this was pretty much like, these are the characters. What do we do now? You know?
I will admit we went through Lord of the Rings in a way that I was pretty happy with, and you know how picky I am. I gotta say,
for how big that was,
Yeah.
we'll talk about that maybe down the line, but for how big that was, I think that was similar. But this one, I think what was interesting was we still had to create out of whole cloth. Even though we acknowledged the other movies, We
Yeah.
created a whole, protagonist. We decided that they were a female. We decided that not capriciously or just throwing anybody a bone. It was like a real story point that we were going to kind of do this. And it was like, yeah, it seemed like the things were just falling into place like Tetris, man.
It was the Jurassic World mold of, like, how do we homage what came before, but push it forward? And I think there's a reason why those work so well, is because you kind of don't have to reset the status quo completely. There's a lot of things that people will just take for granted because they know that world already. So it's easier to start your story in like a world that's already been kind of established for you.
Yeah. Plus, I think it's great that we have a technological advantage right now, that these adventures that we're going to go on with these characters, we really get to see some interesting worlds that we probably wouldn't be able to get to see quite as well as we did in those original movies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I will say, too, I think, Billy, you really unlocked something when you brought the Back to the Future cartoon, like the TV show storyline into the conversation, because that's where Jules and Vern comes from. That's where sort of this whole idea of like, all right, what did happen to Doc Brown? What is like the next chapter of his story after we leave him at the end of Back to the Future 3? That really informed what we ended up doing in the reboot pool. And that really started from saying, well, hey, there was this whole other piece of the Back to the Future story.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
A lesser
even
known piece, but yeah. No, I was just going to say, no one knew about it,
And there have been people who have questioned whether our show is the best it can be if we aren't immersed in the lore of a product. I don't think that is necessary. I do think the group that we have just enough knowledge about a lot of stuff to be the type of people that get these jobs to make these things. It isn't always the super nerd that get these jobs to make these things. And Billy isn't necessarily a super nerd of Back to the Future, but just by proxy of us being the type of people that we are, he was able to pull that and help out. So I think when people look at what we create and they say, oh, those guys just didn't know enough about said project, we knew enough. Whatever you were thinking about, we probably discarded that because we thought it was dumb. And we didn't want to really discuss it with you at that point. You know what I'm saying?
Look,
you Mountain Dew drinker.
See, I didn't say any of that.
I'm usually the one to totally co-sign statements like that, but I will say that I think Back to the Future was a little bit of a perfect storm because Billy was able to bring just enough of that esoteric knowledge that, like, let's say I'm just a random 35-year-old who's going to show up to the theater to watch Back to the Future 4. You're still going to have to tell me on the screen in the context of this movie who Jules and Vern are, what their relationship is with their dad, what their childhoods were like. Like, you can't take any of that for granted, but I might also have that sense memory of like, oh my God, I watched that cartoon when I was a kid. And that's just going to elevate it a little bit more. And I think that's just the chef's kiss, of knowledge, where it's like, I'm not going to try to out-nerd my audience.
Yeah.
But I'm going to be on a wavelength where it's like, they're going to be able to understand the level of nerddom I bring to this, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I love, of course, that there was science involved, guys. We at least are made up science, but still, like, how things might change if there was time travelers messing with time. Like, that's an interesting concept. I love stuff like that.
Right, and when Billy said Jules and Vern, like, I instantly seized on the fact that they had to be evil. And that was I think I built a hill, and I wasn't ready to die at it, but I was like, look at this dope hill. Like, it's pretty good. It's good for walking up, because once we said that Jules and Vern were evil and we committed to them being the villains, just everything starts to sprout out from that. Like, okay, what kind of people are evil time traveling brothers? What kind of goal would they have to have? Us trying to find a goal for them. Woo! That was nice storytelling there.
Well,
guys.
Then it just became, like you said, like, it didn't feel like you were throwing out a suggestion just to be like, well, if they expect a zig, here's the zag. It felt like, okay, yeah, two kids that grew up in every period of time are probably not going to be socially adjusted correctly. And two, that kind of led us to these parallel tracks of, like, Now we have Biff Tannen's kid, who's actually our protagonist, and it's Doc Brown's side of the family that's causing the trouble. And I think that's like the only place where that story never went, because it was very much, Back to the Future, the whole trilogy is very black and white. You have your good guys and you have your bad guys, and they are good and bad for generations back. So to kind of finally turn the formula on itself in this case for these characters, it felt very fresh, and it was very easy to yes and a lot of the ideas when it felt so fresh.
I agree with that. I also think that it made a certain amount of sense, because I think sort of the subtext of that switch is privilege, which is a very modern conversation. Like the idea that those kids would both be socially maladjusted, but would also grow up with a certain sense of entitlement, because it's like, I can live wherever I want, I can do whatever I want because I've got crazy time travel technology. And then meanwhile, Biff Tannen's kid grows up with like this obsequious, never achieve anything father or grandfather to make the timetables work, but lives kind of this like unimpressive suburban life because her father was, or her grandfather was put in his place in the 50s, and then their family never really recovered from it. It does flip the script. And like, I see how those kids would turn out to be jerks, and I see how that kid would turn out to be, yearning for a better life and feeling frustrated by everything around her.
Well, it kind of puts the Tannen girl in the same situation that Marty's in, and how he views his dad before he ever goes back in time. Like, he's a loser, That was the one part about Back to the Future that always, like, I'm not going to say like it's stuck in my craw, but it is like when you really stop to think about it, you're like, oh, it kind of sucks that Marty made his life great, but he destroyed arguably a terrible person. But it's like you said, like, now we get to see how it rippled down in time, where it's like, do we still feel that way about that family, even though we're now a couple generations removed? It's all really meaty, juicy stuff.
And it brings into question, like, do moments in time change who you are? Can one moment or two moments in people's lives really change that person? Like, I love the idea of that sort of thing. Like, and I feel like with the Tannen girl's choices, she's gonna be able to affect her life in a similar way as Marty was able to, and as the changes that.
Well, but and hopefully in a more responsible way too, because to Billy's point, there's that idea of like, this is not a zero-sum game. Like, I have to understand that just because I want to improve my life, that doesn't mean that I can ruin this bully's life, because at the end of the day, he's going to have kids and he's going to have a whole lineage that shouldn't have to pay for the sins of their father. And so it becomes this weird thing where it's like, how can we achieve, I mean, God, to be really highfalutin about it, it's like, how can we achieve equity or justice in a way that doesn't induce generational trauma, which is like not what the movie itself would ever talk about, but it's kind of what the movie's about.
The best movies are that, right?
Right.
They don't tell you what it's about, they show you. Hey,
there was also something haunting, and you'll have to forgive me because I can't remember exactly where we ended up, but I remember at some point in the pitch, and maybe we abandoned it, but it was like they were changing time and it was kind of collapsing on itself in a way because they were trying to get their dad back, right? Doc Brown was like gone. And there is just something like you said about privilege, where it's just like they have all these godlike powers to do everything, but at the end of the day, like, when your number's called, there's just nothing you can do about it. And look at everything else you're taking away. Like, that's the best kind of villain to me, where it's like, they're not trying to rule the world. They're not trying to become Time Lords. They just want their dad back. And like, that I can grab onto. And then I don't feel so crappy about them, depending on what the end game is for their characters. If they join the heroes at the end of the movie, it feels okay because their mission was never to be awful people. It was just out of hurt, which is like a great place for a villain to start.
And that was a key decision in the midst of all the stuff was, or do we have an irredeemable villain or a redeemable villain? I remember us having that conversation. inside the episode. So that's another thing where like you kind of, those are key decisions. It's to talk about time travel. These are key places the timeline could have broken into different sorts of stories. You know, if we didn't acknowledge some of these things and build it.
It was also like a meta commentary too on like, we can't recapture what you saw in 1985. Like Doc Brown and all them, like they're gone. We can't bring it back. We can do new stuff, but like you have to let that part of the past go, which was it just worked on so many levels.
Dude, in that respect, when we decided to kill Biff, because Biff was in this movie for so long. Yeah. Biff was in this movie. Biff was having to change. Biff was going to get his life. But then we started thinking, well, Biff is kind of a sexual assaulter. It's like, oh, kind of, ooh. And then all this different stuff was happening as we were kind of doing the permutations. And then it was like, screw it. If he's dead, we're digging through the detritus of somebody who had this life and may have left these time travel journals or whatever. And then we just started sparking off of that. And it was like Galaxy Brain for a minute.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome.
And for as much as I agree with everything you guys just said, the one sort of nostalgia rush that we were able to bake into this, the moment where Jules and Vern show up in the mall parking lot to kidnap their dad and escape into the time travel, into the time stream, and just strand Karen Tannen there, and her only choice is to jump in the DeLorean and go on a time chase. Like, I'm getting chills talking about it right now, because that is cinema gold right there.
Awesome.
Yeah, because I mean that's where we get to see all of the great special effects that we could use, all the fun gags and callbacks. And
at that moment, though, that's the moment where da 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 comes in for the first time. You know what I mean? Like, you hold off on that, and then right there you drop the old music cue, and for just 5 minutes in that special effects extravaganza, it's like, oh my God, this is what I remember it as when I was 7 years old.
And it's not just some goofy intertextual thing. Right. It's a giant payoff. It's a giant payoff and a put over for the character who is I got your ass. I'm on you. You know, just the whole emotional situation that she would be in that moment. It's just, that's why the hammer and beating up Thanos means anything. It isn't necessarily all just the build up. It's the situation. We've worked you into a situation where you need to hold this guy off for a certain amount of time.
And we talk on the show about how, like, you'll hear it when you listen to our Batman Reboot Rewind, but this idea that, like, why can't it just be the character doing cool stuff? And my argument is sort of that, right? Like, we could create a world in which Karen Tannen and Marty McFly are driving the DeLorean through time from Act 1 and then try to build a movie on that conceit. That's so much less satisfying as a viewing experience than what we're talking about here, than making the Act 3 turn this thing that you didn't think you were going to see and has all this emotional impact because the whole movie's been building to it. It's like, you need that growth, that restraint. You need that trajectory in order to make the movie feel like it means something. And so it's like, you've got to put the character through their paces. You've got to give them places to learn and grow and fail and think they're not going to succeed in order to make it all land.
Absolutely. It's the same reason that, like, great fight scenes aren't great necessarily because the fight scenes are great, but because you've added emotional gravitas to that fight scene.
Yeah, I mean, and just to be fair, unlike Batman, we could start our character as a damn loser. We could just pick a loser and let them kind of do the Marty arc, but in such a different, intriguing way.
Well, and to Ron's point too, what you just said, Ron, like, a fight scene isn't awesome because the moves are awesome. To this day, one of the greatest fight scenes I've ever seen in a movie is that last fight in Gladiator, Russell Crowe versus Joaquin Phoenix, which is not an impressively choreographed fight.
No.
But
the emotional impact.
Oh, it lands, dude. Every freaking swing of the arm means something. It's like, that's where we're trying to get to when we talk about story.
Perfect. So I think, we're several months removed from it and everything. It feels like you guys actually still love this episode. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'd say this is top 5, if not top 3 of all the episodes that we've done. Like, this is the one where as soon as it was over, I think a couple people in the comments said the exact same thing. They're like, I'm almost disappointed because I know I will never get to actually see this movie.
Yeah.
out of all the conversations that we've had on this show, this is one that I would be most confident walking in to pitch to the studio. Like if I could book myself a meeting with Bob Gale or Bob Zemeckis, I would walk in on cloud 9 to drop this story on them.
Yeah, because it has so much the spirit of the other one, and it's like, I think it is emblematic of our show. We try to do things with the spirit of what we're doing. We try hard, Ringo, to do something with the spirit of what it had, but we cannot be slavish to it, because that ends up being you worship it so much that everything's a callback. Nothing means anything. It's all intertextual. You know, we have to have a little bit of remove, which is why we don't draft a freaking Back to the Future expert or a whatever the heck movie expert on everything, Top Gun movie expert. You can't write a flying cockpit scene if you got a pilot there going, well, you know, you couldn't pull those G's. I'm trying to make a movie here, loser. I'm trying to make a movie here. You know what I mean? So there's only so much. I'm just saying, there's only so much of that you could take into account. And I think a lot of times we do a good job. Sometimes we don't, but a lot of times we do a good job of that. I think between
we did not bring in a theoretical quantum physicist to talk about
because as Billy pointed out, it isn't about time travel. And I think that's the best thing about this episode is that's why you're confident to walk it into the thing. Not only the story makes so much sense and the story's so dope, because the characters have so much to do and so much to change, and it's about them. And like you said, the first time you get to have some super duper time stuff that she's in charge of, the first time she gets to literally take the steering wheel of the time machine, as it were, is in the freaking third act. That's all brilliant. I don't want to stroke us too much, you know, but that's all brilliant, man. I'm sorry. That's really good stuff. And I think people agree. 51:45 in the video, Bill says, I got chills. And people have clipped that out and put it as like the pinned comment stuff, or put it as like one of the most popular comments. Yeah. That this is right here. Oh, this is what the show is about. That's why it's so dope.
Yeah.
So that's where we're at. Let's get to some fan comments. All right. Let's see. Backlash 225. Interesting comment here. So what if Jules and Vern are played by the Amell or Hemsworth brothers, or you explain gender changes happened during messing with time and make one or both female and or GLBT, maybe that was supposed to be LGBTQ, then get the Wachowskis to direct and produce.
There's a lot of thoughts there.
That's a lot.
That's 3 or 4 disparate thoughts there. I actually, it's not fresh in my mind who we were thinking of for Jules and Vern. The Amells.
Daniel Radcliffe and Tom Holland.
Yeah.
Who we were thinking of. That's my reaction. I don't understand why you don't love that idea, commenter. How are you going to try to one up that? Go ahead.
I was going to say, you know, we talk about this sometimes, but it's just like the Amell brothers. They're great. They're very. I've met both of them. They're very nice guys. I don't think that they're up for this big of a thing. I saw one of the Amells on some Amazon Prime show where you get like, I think it's called Upload or something. He's just he's not ready. He's not ready for a movie.
Very flat.
And then the Hemsworths, I don't know, that just feels so gimmicky, and I wouldn't want to take away from the true impact that those characters are going to have, just based on the gimmick. And really, the ones that we came up with, Radcliffe and Holland, like, they feel kind of like timeless in a weird way. Like, they don't feel like they look like, oh, that's a 2020 guy, or oh, that's a 1960s looking person.
Oh,
like,
and
they look otherworldly.
Yeah, and one last thing I'll say is one or both of them could be gay. We didn't address it in the story. But and I don't want to J.K. Rowling yet, okay? I'm not trying to do that.
And they poop under their robes, yes.
So yeah, I'm not trying to do that. I'm just saying maybe that could be, but I don't know. It just seemed maybe that is the situation in Hollywood. It's like it's hard for a group of these guys to go, hey, maybe one of them's gay. Well, why are you suggesting that? You know, it's not that that's not a great idea. It's like how to broach it. So maybe that is a blind spot. But honestly, one or both of them could be gay. I don't care, and I know nobody on this panel cares.
But the other thing about those two guys is they could also ostensibly be Michael J. Fox in 1985. Like in terms of like that's what we were trying to do with that casting is you want those guys to recall the original Marty, which you absolutely do not get with the MLs or the Hemsworths.
And evil Martys. Our villains in this are two evil Martys. Come on, man.
Yeah.
It's pretty awesome. So before we get on to more comments, because we got a lot of great comments, I want to give Ed and Bill a chance to talk about Goat Comics.
Goat Comics, baby. Well, you've heard us plugging Goat Comics. Hopefully you've watched our announcement video. The thing is, Goat Comics has been somewhat delayed. We were originally going to launch on the 22nd. The Kickstarter was going to go live. The Kickstarter is still coming. The Kickstarter is going to happen. Right now, we had some opportunities arise behind the scenes to make things even better, and we had to run down that road. So we are doing a little bit of reconfiguring. It is really just in service of delivering the best product possible. So give us a little bit of time, subscribe to this channel, follow us on social media. The links are in the show notes underneath. You will hear more once we have a new launch date. So we're going to announce it, but for now, hang tight. It's going to be great.
So the next comic coming up is Malcav81. Why not make one of the boys the protagonist and the other the antagonist? Make daughter Tannen the sidekick so you get the same opportunity for her arc learning about her father, but you add one more layer of intrigue, showing the two brothers having different viewpoints on their father and his legacy.
No girl sidekicks. That's my only comment. She's the main character. She gets her own arc, and she's fighting two evil baddies. That would be. It's not a hill to die on, but I think that's why we chose it.
Totally.
Well, it's also a hill to die on that made sense for the story we were telling. It is a hill to die on to me because I feel like it made sense. It's the thing that makes sense and where we were trying to go, I think. What about you guys?
Yeah, I don't want to like over harp on it, but I think just the whole point I made about like it just poetically and dramatically, the parallels, the way they are just too. There is kind of like a rhythm to the storytelling. Like, I don't think that the suggestion that they made wouldn't work. I definitely think we could, but I just think it's more satisfying. It's more yin yang to me that the way that we have it now. Plus, I kind of feel like those two brothers having that kind of godlike power to travel through time together probably have like a very warped kind of sense of everything. So I don't know, it just makes more sense to me that they be more aligned in the way that they think rather than one of them has these weird memories and then the other doesn't, because then by that point, that to me becomes more interesting. It's like, how did you guys travel all throughout time and you guys have very different opinions of your father? And then the Tannen girl is just like, oh yeah, and you're here too. Like, it's just, it becomes too much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'll echo that. I mean, I just want to say I don't understand how that would be an upgrade. Like I don't follow the logic of how that makes the story better from that commenter for the exact reason like we talked about. I mean, there's themes baked into the situation here that you're actually undercutting. Like that whole thing about privilege becomes way more complicated in a way that doesn't make it better. It makes it worse because it's not as clean. And then the idea of like the brothers being desperate to save their father and not being able to, you kind of lose that too, because then it's about like one bad brother and the other brother trying to pull him back from the brink, which feels
the good brother is the one that's fighting to let their dad die. Like that's what you set that up. It's like that's weird.
Yeah, and it's tropey. Like, you know, it feels like I just saw that movie when it was called Hell or High Water, and it was like two brothers who were robbing banks and they were like polar opposites and one got the other one in trouble. And then there's absolutely no reason to even have Biff Tannen's daughter in that movie. It just becomes a two-hander between the brothers. So it's a very different movie.
It just seems like a sneaky way to center it around two dudes rather than center it around a woman, which is what we did. I'm not trying to say that pejoratively at all. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Although, you know, it's interesting because I do love the idea of brothers at odds from time to time, but I also feel like brothers stick together. Like even my younger brother, who is a total mess from time to time, I love the dude and I've got his back until I die, period. Like that's how it works because he's my brother and there's nobody else who shares that same kind of bond. So I think that that's an important thing to keep in the film to me. That's just my personal opinion. So then we also got IBZ291. I like the idea that Biff's daughter would have a certain disdain for her father's wimpishness, but comes to realize that the alternative, Trump Biff, is worse and gains more respect for who her father has become. I think it mirrors, if I'm remembering correctly, Marty's relationship with his dad before and after his time travel, which we kind of talked about a little bit. That said, perhaps little Biff girl could prop up her father to balance out his life rather than resulting in on an extreme or the other. Maybe he doesn't become rich, tyrannical Biff, but gets a nice blue-collar job owning a garage, coaching high school football or something. Edit, just finished the whole thing. Would it be too much to add a sort of romance between one of the brothers and Karen that would make their turn all the more bad, like Andrew maybe?
Oh, like he kind of reveals himself to be bad after having been like a... you know what? I don't know that level of intrigue isn't pretty dope. That particular part of that, I don't know that isn't dope.
Yeah, and who doesn't love a little
I'll just
romance?
say, in terms of like the Biff part, I just think it's important for a multiple amount of reasons that we don't try to help me find the words I'm looking for. Yeah.
We don't have a sexual assaulter do
You
well.
don't want to give a pass to
Yeah, it's just
I mean,
it's also just like, again, then it's just like, well, then why are we following Jules and Vern? Where do they plug into this story? It's not a Biff story necessarily, you know?
Yeah. No, and that's the thing. I mean, obviously this comment, there's an edit in there, so it seems like the comment was written before they finished watching the episode and then they came back. I really like the fact that we just got to the place of like, no, scene 1, Biff's funeral. Biff's dead. His legacy is what it is. And so that the other thing about that is like, at that point, it doesn't become about what do we do with Biff. It becomes about how does this character reconcile the legacy that she was given by Biff. And so it's almost, again, it's that generational trauma story where it's like, we're not trying to save Biff or redeem Biff or make Biff's life better, because screw Biff.
Yeah.
And like we also said, if the timetables actually worked, Biff would probably be our main character's grandfather. So yeah, let him die. He's gone. And now it's just about like, I have to live in a world that was shaped by Biff, and how do I move past that? Which I think is an effective story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else? I got nothing to add to that. That's pretty much perfect.
Yeah, next thing.
All right, we got Space Bear. I haven't watched the whole video yet, but I had an idea.
Hey, wait a minute. What's up with all this? Let's take a second. Fucking time out.
Okay.
What's up with all this commenting before? I mean, I get it. It's a very stimulating thing we're doing, and maybe that's the greatest thing of all. Okay, maybe I should not mess this up. But geez, Lewis, you gotta watch the whole thing. You gotta. Okay, I'm sorry.
Well, I can see this because you get excited and then you pause and you go, "Oh, all these ideas in my head. I gotta write them down." Like when you think of a good joke.
No, like I said, I understand this is quite stimulating, and I'm not trying to be demeaning in that way. That's what's so dope. Thank you guys for being that stimulated on this, really. But if you don't watch the whole thing, we may have addressed some of your concerns. We may have, you know what I'm saying?
I'm the one that goes through the comments and kind of finds ones for the show, and maybe you wouldn't be actually. I'd say at least half of all the comments on every video have one of those little PS or edit at the bottom of it, because I feel like it's almost like, and it's the double-edged sword of this, like, not going live just because sometimes we just can't. It's like you have your ideas and you want to get them down before you forget them or whatever, but yeah, we've organically moved on in the conversation. So there is something, I don't begrudge someone who has an idea and they like, oh, that triggered a pitch for me, and then they write it and they haven't finished it yet. I don't like it when it's just like, you guys suck, I haven't finished this yet, but this story sucks. You're like, well, sometimes we don't crack it till minute 49. Like, you gotta hang in there.
It's interesting because there's part of me that's like, when people leave negative comments, there's part of me that enjoys that because it means that they watched the whole thing. I think it's important to have people not like you. I know that sounds weird, but I think it's very important every once in a while to have people go, oh, I don't like this. Because if everybody likes everything you're doing, honestly, I think you're doing something wrong. But at the same time, you have nothing better to do but say something mean. So weird. Like,
to be fair, by the way, you're not wrong. To be fair, Space Bear is not being mean. Space Bear is a great person.
Space Bear is not being mean.
We're not talking about you, Space Bear, if you're watching.
Yeah, we're going to finish your comment here in a second, Space Bear. But I just wanted to point that out. Like, it's so weird to me that you took the time to just be like, I got to tell these guys that I hate something. I don't want to just push the dislike button. I got to tell them that I'm mad.
You know what? Hey, engagement is engagement, baby.
Yeah,
so what's the
absolutely.
rest of the comment?
Let's do it. I haven't watched the whole video yet, but I had an idea that someone could find a time machine and use it to go to the future, then see there is no future, then seek help from Marty and Doc to help stop the apocalypse. What do you think?
That's not too dissimilar kind of from the setup that we ended up with, right? Where it's like the future's kind of collapsing on itself. Am I misremembering?
Well, no, I think we moved away from it a little bit as we got more into the story of her, redemption and all that kind of jazz. So we Robert McKee'd it up a little bit. That kind of fell to the wayside. But yes, I think we did try to establish that there were consequences to how much Jules and Vern were using time travel stuff. And then I think when we started getting obsessed with the butterfly effect, that almost supplanted the idea from my recollection.
Yeah.
The thing about, changing stuff.
I might be retrofitting this, but I thought it was maybe that Jules and Vern showed up and sort of recruited Karen into their time travel adventure under the pretense that was happening. But then part of the whole reveal that they were evil was either that it actually wasn't or that they themselves had caused it. And then that turned us into the whole...
Because she had the thing. Somehow she had the thing that was going to help them crack how to save their dad, for sure.
Yeah, and they had been doing so much revision, so many times going back trying to save their dad, and it wasn't working. That it was
the time journal or whatever, right?
It was glitching out time.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, cool. And I don't think it's a terrible idea. I think it's interesting. It's not where we went, and I don't. I like better that we didn't have a bunch of Marty and Doc in this. I feel like it served it better, but we also still included them.
Do we even have Marty show up at all in this one?
Early we were talking.
Yeah. Well, I think it's more like an act 1 where we sort of intimate that Marty is older and Marty does have Parkinson's, so Michael J. Fox is just playing it as himself, and Marty is sort of almost a Doc Brownish mentor figure to Karen. But obviously he's not a mad scientist, so he can't provide her with cool time machines and stuff. He can sort of just regale her with stories of old adventures with Doc Brown. So it's
what his function was for when she goes, time is glitching out. There's a time machine. Whatever she says that acknowledges she understands this is real. Then Marty can be like, "Whoa, okay, well this is what we did in the '80s." And finally break it down to her and corroborate that she's not crazy. You know what I'm saying? It seemed like he was kind of there to do that and then shuffle off the buffalo, buddy. We got some adventurous to do.
He's a little bit like Michael Caine in a Chris Nolan movie. That's sort of Marty's role in this movie.
All right, we got a couple more comments left. We who's this? Ron Swallow 2. Good job getting Tom Holland cast. Oh, yeah. Nice. I made that one up, guys. That was just me saying, nice job. Okay.
I was looking at my thing. I was like, I don't have that on here. What?
Our last comment is a nice comment from Nero the Hero, one of our very biggest fans. It says, great video. I didn't think this classic could be rebooted. You proved me wrong. I can't wait for the rest of the series.
I put this one on here because I think this encapsulated a lot of the comments, and honestly that's why I'm so proud of this episode, because this was the one that could not be done. It shouldn't be done, and we did it, and not only did it not suck, it's one of our best ones. So I don't know, this is kind of any time that I get pushback on we shouldn't do that, for every Matrix there is a Back to the Future where it's we are capable of doing some stuff that people say, that we say we shouldn't do. So season 3, there's a couple hills I'm gonna die on, and I'm gonna be using Back to the Future as my shield. Like, but we did it this time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to see where we go with season 3. You guys are like the movies that you guys have suggested, and I think a couple of movies suggested as well, are like, I think they're going to be tough, and I can't wait to see what we do with them.
All right.
So,
well, this was a fun one. This was a fun rewind.
Yeah, it was a lot less talking smack, a lot less being mad at each other.
Well, I mean, dude, these are gonna match the episodes. I have deduced this. I am the Mycroft Holmes of this. Dude, of course, they're gonna mirror what happened in the episodes.
Of course.
That's gonna be a recurring theme. So yeah, maybe we should talk about some of the nice ones.
Well,
but also, honestly, for real, these sort of, I don't want to call them autopsies because that puts them in a bad light, but this sort of post-show looking at the stuff, I kind of am intrigued by this type of conversation because I think it lets people know what we were thinking. It lets people know maybe if they watch the episode and they watch one of these and see our differences in recollection, be like, these fools got some rose-colored glasses, or wow, they really recalled that well. There's so much, there's an additive. This is an additive to what we've already put out, and I'm very excited that we're doing these episodes.
You know which one I'm actually looking forward to the most is James Bond. Because that's the one where, like, we didn't argue with each other, but it's maybe the toughest time, like, Matrix aside, where we pitched, we would be like, yeah, this is it. And then we'd be like, oh, that's Mission Impossible. And then 5 minutes ago, be like, oh, this is it. This is Kingsman. Like, James Bond it was like,
and
honestly,
then in the end, it turns out we pretty much did something that already existed too. We just didn't know.
We just didn't know Jack Ryan was a thing. So that's why...
Yeah. James Bond was my least favorite. Straight up, James Bond is my least favorite episode we've ever done. I feel like even in other bad episodes, even in like the contentious episodes, I think there's a lot of interesting ideas and approaches that were discussed. I just felt like almost everything in that James Bond episode was just tired.
There's just been so many spy movies. Like, how do you make a spy movie?
That's going to be a fun one.
Better than a spy movie.
And I think that was perfect because wasn't it? We were at the time we were trying to shoot in batches because we were in.
That's what I said earlier in this episode. Yeah. This was the end of the day.
Yeah.
Where we were full of bad Popeyes chicken sandwiches, and I had a heat rash on my thighs from sitting in that like 102-degree warehouse. And we were trying to crack James Bond. I was like, I hate this. Like, let's get back to the Future.
So again, we say that on this episode to say Back to the Future was basically the first episode of the day, the first official episode we shot in that fashion with the lights and all the camera and all the jazz, and it was just a beaming a light as to what we could be, and we flitted around it all the rest of the shows and stuff. But this is a shining example of what the show could be. And I think that's super cool.
And I just want to add in that I personally love that you guys leave so many comments for us and have so many ideas. That's one of the goals of the show, is not only to show off the cool stuff that we can come up with, but to spark creativity, to really get you guys pumped to tell stories and to hear stories and love stories as much as we love stories. So keep leaving those comments. Keep letting us know how you feel. Keep telling us your ideas. Even if we disagree with them, we still like to hear them. So thanks as always for listening to our Reboot It Rewind. On behalf of Ed, producer Bill, and Billy Business, be safe out there, and we will see you next time.